Hello, beautiful Cancer, Sun, Moon, Rising, and Venus. Welcome to today's reading. Let's see what messages the cards have for you today. There is a name that has been sitting behind your teeth for weeks. You have not said it out loud to anyone. You swallow it every time it tries to rise. That name belongs to a woman who is thinking about you right now more than she has ever let herself admit. And the first thing I need you to understand is that her silence was never about you being easy to walk away from. It was about you being the one person she could not stay composed around. You already felt her before I said a single word. That pull in your chest 2 nights ago was not nothing. That was her awake at an hour she should have been asleep, holding your name in exactly the way you have been holding hers. Before we go any deeper, I want to be honest about what came through when this reading opened. The very first image was a woman sitting in a parked car outside somewhere, engine off, hands still on the wheel. She is not going anywhere. She is sitting with a decision, and you are the decision. She has been sitting in that car, in one form or another, far longer than she would ever confess to. Some of you know the exact car, some of you know the exact street, and the ones who do just felt something drop in the stomach because recognition always arrives in the body first and the mind argues with it afterward. Here is the proof I want you to watch for over the next few days. She is going to bring up something you were certain she never noticed. A small thing, a sentence you said once, a shirt you wore, a joke you made and forgot the same afternoon. When it surfaces, you will understand that she has been keeping you far more carefully than her behavior ever let on. There is one detail about the timing of this that I am holding back until the very end. The Queen of Swords comes forward first, and she sits very straight. This is a woman who has learned to lead with her mind because her heart has been used against her before. She is sharp, she is composed. She keeps her face still even when something is moving hard underneath it. That is the whole way she has handled you. Calm on the surface, careful with her words, giving nothing away that could be turned into a weakness later. You have mistaken that composure for distance. It was never distance, it was armor, and she built it long before she met you. Then the Three of Swords arrives, and this card is an old wound she has never fully closed. A heart pierced through, rain behind it, nothing dramatic, just quiet damage. That is what she carries into everything now. Someone got past her guard once and left through it, and she promised herself she would not let that happen again. So when you came along and started getting past the guard without even trying, it frightened her more than it moved her. Not because the feeling was wrong, because the feeling was strong, and strong is the exact thing she swore she would never allow herself again. Say her name to yourself right now, just once, silently. Watch what your body does before your mind has a chance to interrupt. If your breath caught, that is your answer arriving ahead of your reasoning. You have not imagined this connection, and you never once imagined it. The pull has been running in both directions the whole time. Every time she crosses your mind without warning, that is the moment she was thinking of you first. Thought moves between two people who are meant to close the distance. She has been thinking of you at hours she would be embarrassed to name. There is a message she started and deleted. It was more honest than she was comfortable with, and it frightened her because it sounded like surrender. So she erased it and told herself she would find something more controlled to say later. Later has not come, because there is no controlled way to say what she feels. She is closer to sending an unguarded version than she has ever been. And when she does, it will not be polished. And the lack of polish is exactly how you will know it is real. Now I want to take you inside her, because the inside does not match the outside at all. On the surface, she looks fine. She looks like a woman who is completely in control of herself and unbothered by any of this. That surface is a performance, and she maintains it with real effort. Underneath it is a woman who has organized her entire routine around not feeling this. She stays busy on purpose. She keeps her days full because the quiet is where you live, and the quiet has been winning lately. The Four of Pentacles is the first card showing me her inner posture. A figure clutching a coin to the chest, sitting on two more, refusing to let anything move. That is her with everything she feels about you. Held tight, never spent, never risked. She does not share it, and she does not act on it. She simply grips it and calls the gripping safety. But held things get heavier over time, not lighter, and the weight of this one has started to show. That is why her composure cracked recently. She got tired of carrying it in complete silence. Then the Eight of Cups walks in, and this is the card of her leaving. A figure walking away uphill under a moon, leaving full cups standing behind. The cups are not empty. Nothing was finished. She walked away from something that still had life in it, and she has been telling herself a clean story about why, timing, circumstances, being in a bad place. Some of it is true, and none of it is the real reason. The real reason is that she did not trust herself to hold something this important without losing herself in it. So she left before she could get hurt again. That is fear wearing the costume of self-protection, and part of her already knows it. Her resistance is not about desire. I want that completely clear. The wanting was never the question, not for a single week. Her resistance is about safety. She has convinced herself that letting you in fully means handing over the power to hurt her, and she has spent years making sure no one holds that power again. That is why she can feel this intensely and still keep her distance. Reaching for you would mean lowering the guard, and lowering the guard is the one thing she has trained herself never to do. She would rather ache quietly behind the armor than risk being unprotected in front of you. Then the moon appears, and this is where her nights actually live. Two towers, a winding path, a dog and a wolf crying at the same moon. Nothing on that card is certain, and everything on it is felt. She has been dreaming about you, and I do not say that for effect. Not grand dreams, ordinary ones, you in a room, you saying something plain. She wakes up unsettled and carries it into her morning. That is why some of your days have felt heavy for no reason. You have been catching the edge of what she leaves behind at night. The moon also shows a distortion she has not corrected. She believes you have moved on and stopped caring. Someone may have told her you seemed fine, and fine translated in her mind to finished. She read your steadiness as indifference, which is the oldest misreading there is. You did the healthy thing and held yourself together, and she took it as proof that you let go. That single misunderstanding is doing more damage than anything either of you actually did, and it is about to be corrected by circumstance whether she plans it or not. She has started doing small things she stopped doing a while ago, looking at things she used to look at, leaving space in her evenings for nothing in particular. She is preparing without letting herself call it preparation. That is how a woman like this moves, sideways and quietly, and then all at once. The sideways part has already begun, and you cannot see it from where you stand. It looks like nothing from the outside, and it is not nothing. It is a woman slowly rearranging her life around a possibility she has not admitted out loud. Something has already shifted, and it shifted from the inside, not from any event. There was no announcement and no dramatic moment. It moved the way a season changes overnight while everyone is asleep. You woke up one morning with her on your mind before you had any reason to be. That was not random. That was her awake first, holding your name before the day started. You have been trading the same weight back and forth across the hours without either of you naming it. The Knight of Pentacles is the first card standing over this passage. A rider on a heavy, still horse, patient, holding a single coin. This is the slowest knight in the deck and also the only one who actually arrives. She does not gallop, she does not lose interest, she does not turn around halfway. That is the pace of what is coming toward you. Unremarkable and certain. You have been waiting for something dramatic, and that is exactly why it feels absent. Dramatic arrivals collapse. This kind does not. She is moving in a straight line now, and the line ends where you are. Then the Ace of Cups arrives, and this card is a feeling that overflows and cannot be held back anymore. A hand offering a cup so full it spills over the sides. This is her heart reaching a point where the containment stops working. She has kept the lid on this for a long time through effort and discipline. The Ace of Cups is what happens when the effort finally fails. Something honest is going to pour out of her, and it will not be measured or careful. It will be the truth arriving faster than her defenses can stop it, and it will land on you before you have prepared a face to receive it with. Then the King of Wands arrives, and this may be a person connected to her or a version of the confidence she is trying to reach for, bold, warm, sure of himself. This is the energy she wishes she could lead with instead of the armor. Someone or something is pushing her toward courage, toward finally doing the brave thing instead of the safe one. She is being nudged out of her caution by a force she cannot quite argue with, and that nudge is speeding everything up. Now, let me name what is lining up, because three things are one step from a message that has already been written in her head, one step from your name being said out loud in a room you are not in, one step from the version of this where the silence finally breaks. The first thing lining up is her fear loosening into something more like impatience. Fear keeps a person frozen, impatience makes them move. That is the shift that matters. The second is a person near her who has stopped letting her pretend she is fine. The third is a practical opening in her life that was not there before. Something ended, something quieted, a long pressure finally lifted. She noticed the empty space in her week and did not know what to do with it. She has room now, and the lack of room was half of her excuse. Your side of this has done its own work, and I want it acknowledged. You stopped picking apart everything you said and did in the final stretch of this. You stopped rereading old conversations, hunting for the exact moment it went wrong. That constant self examination was keeping the whole thing frozen from your end. When you finally set it down, the situation started to breathe again. I know that sounds unrelated, and it is not unrelated at all. These things stay stuck when both people keep clutching different parts of them. You released your grip, and her side started to slide on its own. What is moving now does not need you to push it. It needs you awake. It needs you reachable. It needs nothing more than that from you. That is a strange kind of relief, and you are allowed to accept it. You have been working overtime on something that stopped being your job a while ago. Put the tools down. The other side is finally carrying its share of the weight. This does not unfold gently, and I would rather you knew that in advance. One structure has to come down first, and it is hers, not yours. Everything else in this situation is resting on that single structure. The tower is the card, and I am not going to soften it. A building struck at the top, two figures falling from it into the dark. What falls here is the story she told herself about who she is. That story said she was a woman who does not need anyone, who is safest alone, who cannot be reached. That story is going to break, and it breaks in a single afternoon. Something small sets it off. A song, a photo, a stranger who moves the way you move. She will have an ordinary moment, and it will take the roof clean off. After that, the sequence runs fast, and it runs without her permission. First, the excuse dies, and the excuse was the only thing holding the distance in place. Then the waiting dies, because a woman with no excuse cannot justify waiting anymore. Then the armor dies, and the armor is always the last thing to go. That is your cascade. Three things, and they fall in that exact order. Now, the part I most want you to hear in this passage: you are not required to do anything to make that happen. Not a carefully timed post for the right eyes, not a message to the mutual friend who would surely pass it along, not an accidental appearance at the place she still goes. Strength is here for that reason, and it is the gentlest card in the deck. A woman with her hands resting on a lion, closing its mouth without any force at all. She is not fighting it. She is not afraid of it. She is simply steady. That is the position you already hold, and you arrived at it without meaning to. You outlasted your own panic, and outlasting it changed the entire shape of this. There was a version of you not long ago who would have chased this. That version would have sent the message, and the message would have cost everything. You are not that person anymore, and that is the quiet victory underneath all of this. Chasing now would hand her back the excuse the tower just took away. It would let her stay behind the armor while you did all the reaching. Do not give her that, not out of pride, out of accuracy. She needs to be the one who lowers the guard, because lowering it is the exact thing that heals her. Then the Two of Cups lands. And this is the peak of the entire reading. Two people facing each other, cups raised, nothing standing between them. Here is what I am given, and it is specific and physical. A table with two drinks on it and one of them barely touched. She talks first, and she talks too fast for the first few minutes. You notice her hands before you register a single word she says. There is a moment where she stops in the middle of a sentence and just looks at you. That is the moment, and you will feel the room change temperature. Not romantic yet. Something plainer. The relief of finally being in front of the person. You will hear her say your name, and it will sound strange in her mouth. Strange, because you have not heard it in that particular voice for a long time. Something about a doorway, a coat, a pause outside where neither of you moves to leave. That is the sensory center of this, and it is closer than it feels today. Now, the practical warning, because there is one, and it matters. When it begins, do not meet her with the armored version of yourself. You will want to, and the wanting is completely understandable. She hurt you, and testing her feels like collecting something you are owed. But a woman in the middle of her own tower is already stripped down to the frame. Testing her then does not prove her loyalty. It only proves your fear. Ask her direct questions instead, and ask them without heat in your voice. She will answer badly at first, and then she will answer honestly. Take the second answer. That is where the truth actually lives. What is coming apart on her side was never solid to begin with. You are not losing anything in this. You are watching a wall come down. Walls come down loudly, and the quiet that follows is the part worth having. That quiet is where the honest conversation finally becomes possible. Stand exactly where you are standing and let the noise finish on its own. Look at what this stretch of silence actually built in you, because it built something real. You stopped asking people whether they had heard anything about her. You stopped inventing generous explanations for behavior that hurt you. You stopped doubting your own memory just to keep an easy peace. You started sleeping without the phone in reach of your hand. You started finishing your own sentences instead of trailing off to keep things smooth. You got harder to reach, and you did not do it on purpose. It happened because you finally had something else worth your attention. None of that felt like growth while it was happening. It felt like surviving a week, and surviving is the whole thing. The Eight of Pentacles sits over this list, and it is the card of the workbench. A person carving the same shape over and over, alone, with no one watching. Nobody applauds any single piece of that work. That is what you were doing while she avoided a conversation. You were quietly building the version of yourself that can survive any answer she brings. That work is finished now, and it does not come undone the moment she speaks. Now hear the instructions, because this next stretch asks something of you. Stay inside your own week when the contact comes. Do not clear your schedule for it. Do not cancel the plan you already made for Saturday. Do not sit at home waiting for a follow-up that will arrive on its own time. Do not tell everyone around you. Not yet. Tell no one for a few days. Talking about it too early turns it into a performance for other people. Keep it small and private until it is solid enough to survive opinions. You will know when that point comes, and it is not this week. Until then, hold it the way she held everything she feels, quietly. Do not ask her what she said about you in those rooms, and I mean that firmly. You already know it was strong. You do not need it recited back to you. Asking makes it a compliment, and it was never meant to be one. Let her tell you in her own words when she is standing in front of you. Then the Page of Cups closes this part, and it makes me soften a little. A young figure holding a cup with a fish rising out of it, surprised by their own feeling. Something is beginning that has no rehearsal behind it. This is not the return of the old thing exactly. This is a first honest attempt. She is going to be clumsy, and clumsy is the correct sign here. Smooth would mean rehearsed. Rehearsed would mean she is still protecting herself. Wanting the polished version is wanting the version that is not true. If any of this is landing on you, and you know whether it is, leave one word underneath. Just one. Whatever word your chest hands you first. And I do read them more than people believe. Subscribe if you want the next part of this when it comes. Now the last thing, and it is the thing you most need to hold. This was never an ending, and I want you to hear that clearly. Endings are loud. Endings have a final scene. Endings burn the evidence. She kept the evidence. She carried the feeling through weeks of silence and did not put it down. That is not an ending. That is a woman in the middle of a pause. A pause is not a disappearance, and you have been reading it as one. Nobody guards a feeling this carefully for something they have finished with. She paused badly and for far too long, and she never actually left. That is why this is going to feel like continuing, not like starting over. So keep your ordinary days exactly as they are. They are working. Let her do the arriving. That part belongs entirely to her now. And be gentle with yourself while the last of the waiting runs out. You held a whole situation together alone, and nobody thanked you once. I saw it. The reading saw it. That is the truth of this passage, and it does not need decorating. You were not forgotten. You have been carried quietly by a woman who did not know how to say so. That has been true for a while now, and today you finally know it. Carry that into your week and let it change how you sit inside it. You are not the person hoping to be remembered anymore. That part ended. Now, the timing, and I am going to be as exact as I am allowed. There are two windows here, and the first one is very close. It sits before the end of this month, in the back half of it, on a weekend. And this surprised me because weekends usually stall these things. But she is not reaching out from an office. She is reaching out from home. That is why it lands on a day with nothing scheduled around it. There is a number 7 attached, and it keeps arriving in the read. 7 days, a seventh of a month, or the seventh time she opens the thread. I cannot narrow which, and I will not invent a certainty I do not have. But the 7 is there, and you will recognize it after the fact. The 2 of Pentacles shows the timing better than any words of mine. A figure juggling 2 coins inside an endless loop drawn around both of them. 2 dates are being weighed, and she keeps moving one and then the other. That is the delay you have been feeling for the last couple of weeks. It is not indecision about you. It is indecision about the day. Those are very different problems, and only one of them is serious. If the first window passes, the second is roughly 6 weeks behind it. That one is heavier, and that one is not a message. It is a meeting. The second window is where the table from the last passage becomes real. 2 drinks, 1 untouched, and a woman talking far too fast at first. That does not happen inside a text thread. That one needs a room. Now the message. And I am going to give it exactly as I received it. She wants you to know that the silence was never a judgment on you. Not once. Not for a day. Not even in the worst week of it. She was managing something she was afraid of, and fear keeps its own calendar. She let it run far past the point where it made any sense. She is aware of what that looked like from where you were standing. There is a sentence she has been carrying, and it is a short one. Something close to, "You were the one person I could not stay guarded around." She has already said a version of it to herself in the quiet. She will say it to you badly, in the middle of something unrelated. You may miss it the first time, so I am telling you now to listen. The sun closes this reading, and I did not reach for that card. It arrived last, which is where it belongs, and it is not subtle. A child on a horse, a wall behind them, full daylight over everything. Nothing is hidden under the sun. That is the entire meaning of it. What was carried in private is going to be said in the open. The feeling held behind the armor becomes a person in a room with you. The words kept in silence get spoken to your face. That is the whole movement of this reading, from hidden to plain. So here is where we land, and this is my last word on it. You came into this asking whether you were still real to her, whether you had become something she no longer let herself feel. You are the thing she could not put down, and she is about to be caught holding it. Caught by her own overflowing heart in a moment she did not fully plan. Your part between now and then is smaller than you have been making it. Live the week, do the work, keep the plans you already made. Do not sit near the phone, and do not put it in another room either. Both of those are exactly the same behavior wearing different clothes. Answer when she speaks, and answer as yourself, not as the armored version. And when she finally says the strong thing directly to your face, let it land. Do not deflect it. Do not make a joke to survive it. You have waited a long time to hear it from the right mouth. Stand still and take it. That is the only instruction that matters. That is where this reading ends. And it ends where it opened, with a woman in a parked car, hands still on the wheel, sitting with a decision that has your name on it. It was carried quietly. It was carried sincerely. And it was carried for you. Hold that gently this week, and let the days bring the rest of it. They are much shorter now than they have been in a very long time. And the next one of them may be the one that finally turns the engine on and brings her to the room where you have been standing the whole time. Now the timing, and I am going to be as exact as I am allowed. There are 2 windows here, and the first one is very close. It sits before the end of this month, in the back half of it, on a weekend. And this surprised me, because weekends usually stall these things. But she is not reaching out from an office. She is reaching out from home. That is why it lands on a day with nothing scheduled around it. There is a number 7 attached, and it keeps arriving in the read. 7 days, a seventh of a month, or the 7th time she opens the thread. I cannot narrow which, and I will not invent a certainty I do not have. But the 7 is there, and you will recognize it after the fact. The 2 of Pentacles shows the timing better than any words of mine. A figure juggling 2 coins inside an endless loop drawn around both of them. 2 dates are being weighed, and she keeps moving one and then the other. That is the delay you have been feeling for the last couple of weeks. It is not indecision about you. It is indecision about the day. Those are very different problems, and only one of them is serious. If the first window passes, the second is roughly 6 weeks behind it. That one is heavier, and that one is not a message. It is a meeting. The second window is where the table from the last passage becomes real. 2 drinks, 1 untouched, and a woman talking far too fast at first. That does not happen inside a text thread. That one needs a room. Now the message, and I am going to give it exactly as I received it. She wants you to know that the silence was never a judgment on you. Not once. Not for a day. Not even in the worst week of it. She was managing something she was afraid of, and fear keeps its own calendar. She let it run far past the point where it made any sense. She is aware of what that looked like from where you were standing. There is a sentence she has been carrying, and it is a short one. Something close to, "You were the one person I could not stay guarded around." She has already said a version of it to herself in the quiet. She will say it to you badly, in the middle of something unrelated. You may miss it the first time, so I am telling you now to listen. The sun closes this reading, and I did not reach for that card. It arrived last, which is where it belongs, and it is not subtle. A child on a horse, a wall behind them, full daylight over everything. Nothing is hidden under the sun. That is the entire meaning of it. What was carried in private is going to be said in the open. The feeling held behind the armor becomes a person in a room with you. The words kept in silence get spoken to your face. That is the whole movement of this reading, from hidden to plain. So here is where we land, and this is my last word on it. You came into this asking whether you were still real to her, whether you had become something she no longer let herself feel. You are the thing she could not put down, and she is about to be caught holding it, caught by her own overflowing heart in a moment she did not fully plan. Your part between now and then is smaller than you have been making it. Live the week, do the work, keep the plans you already made. Do not sit near the phone, and do not put it in another room either. Both of those are exactly the same behavior wearing different clothes. Answer when she speaks, and answer as yourself, not as the armored version. And when she finally says the strong thing directly to your face,